All right, good evening everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're so glad to be here once again in the space of the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history. This is one of our favorite places to partner. We're always very honored to be in this sacred space here in Atlanta. We're grateful to all of the librarians and volunteers who make this space what it is. I see Ms. Bean in the back. Ms. Bean is the head of programming here. We also have other librarians who are here tonight, and they always do so much to make us all feel at home. If you would please silence your cell phones, that would be great. We have many books available for sale out in the lobby, and we're going to have a wonderful book signing after our conversation tonight. Our conversation partner tonight is the one and only Jericho Brown. Yeah. Jericho is one of our favorite poets, and also, of course, one of our favorite people. He's an incredible interviewer and just an incredible person and literary citizen. I'm not going to read his full bio, but he's got the receipts. He's gotten all the awards. Recently, he's gotten a Pulitzer Prize for poetry. He's gotten the National Book Award. He's gotten Guggenheim Foundation, all the things. So sometimes we forget and act like he's just a local fellow. But we're very lucky to have him in our presence. And we're very lucky to have Honorée Fanonne Jeffers here tonight. She's a fiction writer, poet, and essayist. She is the author of the acclaimed New York Times bestselling and Oprah's book club pick, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award in Fiction and the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. It was nominated for the National Book Award. She is also the author of 5 poetry collections, including the NAACP Image Award-winning The Age of Phyllis, which was also nominated for the National Book Award. We love Honorée Fanonne Jeffers. She is also a great literary citizen, and what I mean by that is somebody who loves other writers, loves to be in the community of books, and loves readers, and loves bookstores, which we're always grateful for. So I know she's going to want to talk to every single one of you and hear where you're from and who your people are as she signs your books. So I'm going to get out of the way and welcome these 2 amazing folks to the stage. Please put your hands together for Jericho Brown and Honorée Fanonne Jeffers.
Hello. Try singing.
Hello.
Thank you.
Is it me you're looking for?
A lot of people don't know this, but Honorée really was a blues singer for a part of her life. So maybe she'll sing the blues for us.
No, I will not. I will not, because the older you get, like I didn't have but like 2 octaves for me, 1 and a half to begin with, and then when you get older, but I enjoyed it, and it led me to, blues poetry, blues
That's true.
fiction,
That's true.
blues criticism. Let me say this: Jericho has not won the National Book Award, but what Jericho has won is the MacArthur Fellowship. Wait. Jericho, can I hold $50?
Okay, so I'm about to ask you some questions about this book.
Okay.
Are you ready for that?
I am ready for it. And what you all need to know is Jericho and I are very dear, close friends. So he's gonna try to be all fancy, but I'm not like, you know, this is my friend, you know, as well, who is literally a genius. So it's gonna be, you know, kind of a mixture of intellectual and just sitting on the porch.
Well, and I hope I can do this. I'm really honored. I should tell this audience, I'm really honored to be here to talk about this book in particular. There's a feeling that I had. I remember this very distinctly. When I was 19 years old, I met people like Beverly Gasheftal, who's here in this audience.
Ooh, hey, Dr. Beverly!
And Rudolph Bird, and I was introduced to the work of people like Barbara Christian, all the way to poets like S.X. Hemphill. And so there's this short period of my life where I became very well read in Black queer and Black feminist texts. And I felt reading this book, that knowing, that returning, that understanding, coming back to me in a way that I have not felt since I was 19 years old. And I want to say this very, you know, some of you already bought the book, but if you haven't, I think it's a good idea, because the book is really, really beautiful, really well made. I think it's a structural, as a writer, I'm a little jealous, a little mad about what she manages structurally and about how the book defies genre. I mean, the book has poems, prose poems, it's literary criticism, it's literary theory, it's also memoir, and in its memoir making, manages, and I've never seen this done before, manages to show how the speaker, her mother, her matrilineal lineage are a part of, not like, it's not my story, it's not Honorée's story, it is the opportunity to read the history of Black women. This is a book with a 15-page bibliography. And so it's not just, let me tell you stories about my family when I was growing up. It's a book that's, there are essays about Ellis Walker, about Toni Morrison, about Thomas Jefferson, which I hope I get to ask questions about today, because I love to stomp on Thomas Jefferson's ass.
Don't we all?
And,
let's just dig them up and stomp on them again.
So, I do want to get to some of those things, because it is very much a book of cultural criticism that makes use of the self in its criticism. But also, you know, poems about the United States government, about the presidency, no matter who the president is. I'm saying poems, I should say essays, about these things, essays written by a poet. And so there's a music to these essays that I really appreciate. And I feel like, I mean, I don't know, you know, what y'all are interested in, but I feel like I had been waiting for this book, and it came right on time. It's beautiful. But I want to start, my first question really just has to do with something that is not that I want to get to some of those bigger, bigger is not the word, but some of those more known intellectual properties of the book. But I want to talk about something that I know many people have been asking you about, that the book circles around, that is not the main or big issue of the book, but because of readership,
right,
can become that. One of the things that this book does very brilliantly and beautifully is discuss the fact of you having been molested as a child by your father, Lance Jeffers, the Black Arts Movement poet.
Yes.
And because the book is a book by, for, and about Black women, a book about growing up understanding or trying to come to terms with your relationship with your mother given that fact. I mean, that's part of what's happening. And at the end of the book, there seems to me real forgiveness of your mother who, for you and for your two sisters, seems to have denied the fact of this incest. Which must...
I'm sorry. I'm just so happy to be
You're
with
sweet.
you. I love you so much. Just to have, you know, I always tell Jericho, I'm not friends with him because he's Jericho Brown. I'm friends with him because he is brilliant and he gets me. You know, he gathers me. You know, and, but it is amazing to me to, you know, we have conversations like this all the time on the phone, but, you know, to have these kind of conversations with someone who's known my work for so long and knows what my project is. So I just wanted to, this is why I'm getting weepy. Also, I think I had said this maybe a couple of weeks ago, that I spent so much time pretending that my grief was anger, that I think that's why I cry so much now, because I pushed it down. So go on ahead.
Well, one of the many things that this book is a tribute in many ways to the fact of womanism and to Alice Walker, who coined the term.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think is so important about this book is that your mother was Alice Walker's teacher.
Yes.
In Eatonville, Georgia. Eatonton,
yes.
sorry.
Eatonville is Hurston.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
People do that all the time.
I do that, yeah. In Eatonton, Georgia. And I also noticed that your mother is a woman with one eye, and Alice Walker's a woman with one eye. My father's a man with one eye, so I'm always noticing.
Miss Alice used to have written about the fact that Mama was sort of a role model for her after that happened, that she could see that Mama just went on and lived. And I do think that's very profound and strange and root workerish in a lot of things.
So there are many essays titled "In Search of Our Mothers" blank, and you sort of fill in that blank with the subject. And the book, towards its close, ends with an essay, "In Search of Our Mother's Forgiveness." How do you manage, or how did you manage, or how do you understand? Because what's amazing to me is the same Black feminism that works to free you in the mind from your familial situation growing up is the same Black feminism that knows better than your mother's denial of you, is the same Black feminism that allows you forgiveness of your mother. But how do we get there? Like, how do we get there? I'm sorry to be this way, but how do we get there with family members who we know love us, but are also willing to hurt us in such ways?
You know, I wish that I could, maybe in 5 more years, maybe in 10 more years, that I could verbalize how. I can do that with fiction, and I can get inside human nature, and even sometimes with other real people. But for me, I don't really know why. I just know when I walked in the hospital room after having dreamed of Mama for, months, and I saw her, and they told me that
this is after having been estranged from her.
We were for 5 years, and I hadn't seen her in 9 years. And when they told me that Medicaid was not going to pay for her, I just instantly said, I'll pay for it. And everyone else was trying to say, oh, this is Jesus finally touching you or whatever. And I'm like, Jesus and I have been homies for quite some time. I'm a pro-queer, pro-trans, radical feminist Christian. I always say that's like jumbo shrimp. That's an oxymoron, right? And there's an essay in there where I speak to struggling with my, Christianity in light of the way that they subjugate women and, eject Black gay, trans, LGBTQIA, they basically say God doesn't love you, right? Which I think is the most horrible thing, not to get too off track, I'm coming back. It's the most horrible thing to say to someone that you were not made in your Creator's image. But I've been there. Not the same as my queer and trans kindred, so I don't know exactly what that means, but I have been there where people are saying, God does not love you if, when I knew differently, but I couldn't prove it. But then there came a time in my 40s where I was like, well, neither could any of these other people in the Bible. Moses came down. Who's to say he didn't chisel all that stuff himself, But I think that Christianity did not bring me back to Mama. Love brought me back to Mama. I cannot explain why. I only know my anger was just gone. When I saw, maybe this is getting closer to it. Because I can't really go into all of it for legal reasons. You know the whole story, right? But I think that I saw that she needed the protection from me that I didn't receive from her. And I felt like I was going to give that. Okay, you need to stop, because I'm tearing up too. But I felt like she needed me. She was helpless. And in doing that, somehow, because there were all kinds of family issues that were making it difficult for me to step into that role, and all of a sudden I realized, and I'm only realizing this right now talking, like, the kind of difficulty she had as a dark brown skinned woman in the 50s, when her own mother was telling her how ugly she was. When her own mother would not come to her graduation from Spelman College. Mama always talks about one of her relatives who did come, sat on the front row of Sister's Chapel and pulled the banana out her purse. And Mama said, well, it was country, but at least she was there, you know what I mean? And so, thinking about that, thinking about how her own community had told her she had no right to exist. It doesn't mean that what happened was right. But if I may, I realize, like in doing that, I found the strength to be the woman that I've always wanted to be, because I realized it took Herculean strength for me to do that. And every Black woman doesn't have that. And that's why I'm writing about these sort of issues, because I want better for my baby sisters, and I want better for my sisters who are my age, and there are some women who are even older, and I want them to have peace. I want them to have peace because I have it now and every day. You know how when we would, because we're both from Deep South, and we run into, real old people, country people, and let's just say Maybelline. Hey, Miss Maybelline, how you doing? Child, I'm blessed. I woke up in my right mind. And that's the way I feel. I woke up in my right mind. I woke up with words on my tongue. I woke up with peace. These hardwood floors, these little plants that I didn't kill because I killed some of them. I woke up walking through this house, feeling free. And a free Black woman is a precious, rare thing.
But that, one of the things that I feel like I better learned through this book and through, the other thing that this book does really wonderfully is it sets your mother's story. I almost don't want to overtalk because there are some things that happen in this book that I just want you to see as it happens. But your mother's story is set alongside these names, historical names of black women that we know, maybe a little more than we know your mother, and your story is too. And so we have this better understanding of why that is a particularized and yet among black women a very known way of being.
It's a known way of being. How many of us have been abused in our community because we were abused by a black man? Status. Be quiet. You know, I have a friend who was being sexually harassed by a professor that I know. I won't go into, the details. And I said, you do know that I'm a mandatory reporter. But now, you're my good friend, so do you want me to report this? And she said, I don't want to bring another black man down. And I said, so you're just gonna let this man touch on you? You just, and not let, but you know what I'm saying? Like, not to blame the victim, but I was just like, girl, I got you. I have you. Let's do this. And then she just went and looked for another job. So she had to look for another job.
So it's not to bring the black man down.
So it's not. No, it's not. Wait, and let's be very clear. Don't bring the cisgender, heterosexual black man down. And I thought, this is so many of our stories. This is it. And I know that, Dr. Beverly is in the room. I know that there are other black feminists who made it possible. Like, I wouldn't have even known I had permission to say any of the things that I've said. And so at this point, I'm 58. I'm in the last third of my life. And we're in the middle of the craziest national political situation. I'm just flabbergasted. And I said, well, if not now, when?
Can you read, because that freedom that you talk about does come with a certain kind of a commitment to that freedom. You do have to pay what seems to me a price for it. And so I actually wanted Honorée to read the entirety of this essay.
But I will not.
But she will not.
Okay.
And so I asked her, okay, you can cut it down, but just make sure wherever you cut it.
And then he's making sure there is a naughty part.
I said when you cut it, just make sure you read this part. But this part is really important, and it goes to what you were saying in the car about dick. You know what I'm saying?
Oh my God! Did you just say that?
Okay, what I was saying in the car about dick.
There are elders in the room, Jericho.
I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's my politics of respectability coming out. No,
I know the elders never heard of it.
I guess it's Atlanta. It's different, right? It's not Talladega, right?
There's definitely more dick.
Please stop saying the D word. Okay, so
I love this essay because I think it's a womanist theology, not a manifesto, but a kind of a theology in the way that it thinks about.
So I'm going to skip a couple to get to that one place.
I want people to hear, what the voice of the book says.
And also we're poets, so the voice is very important with the word.
I've never seen anything in prose like this voice, I have to say.
He's just stroking my ego, but it feels good.
I don't have to say that.
A brief note concerning womanist identity. Let's be clear about what a womanist is. Let me drop some science on you. I'm not really a scientist. I barely passed biology and chemistry in high school. Drop some science as an African-American vernacular reference from the 1980s when I was a young girl. It means I have a bit of wisdom to share. Are you ready? Then let's proceed. The first use of the term womanist is attributed to the poet, novelist, and essayist Alice Walker, who defined it in her 1983 essay collection, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Womanist Prose. What's really interesting is now they've cut the womanist prose out in subsequent editions. To be a womanist, you must care about Black people and about other communities of color, and you must understand that there is a global majority of people of color. You should care about the well-being of families and racism and oppression of all genders in those communities of color, and certainly this includes the welfare of men, though it does not include the dominance of men. You must want justice. You must want love. You must want children to inherit a better world. And you must be a feminist to be a womanist. Walker writes that into her definition. He gets so tickled by this. A Black feminist or feminist of color. And so I'm going to go to the part about suffering. I know that it's difficult, especially for an African American woman who is expected to prop up everybody but herself, to say, I am a womanist, which means I'm a Black feminist, because you're afraid you will suffer consequences. You're afraid you will be shunned in your Black community. If you like to sleep with a man, you're afraid you won't be able to keep that man. But if you're a Black woman, you're already suffering. Look around in this country. Do you really want to keep a man by throwing your equal rights by the side of the road? Wouldn't you like to suffer in service of something rather than suffer because you have no rights? And yes, sister, this is his favorite part, you can still sleep with men if you're a womanist. You can ride or be ridden, whichever you choose. Do you, girlfriend? Because I sleep with men too, and I like it. I like it very, very much. There is somebody's mama in here that I knew when I was a young girl. I'm so embarrassed. But I love being a womanist, a Black feminist, because I love the rights that feminism gave me and other Black women. I love those rights more than I love sleeping with men. Okay, break it down, because Jericho really loved that essay. What did you really love about that essay?
Well, I think I also love the way that after something is known, and after it has been mangled, its definitions get mangled, like a thought. The definitions of the thought can get mangled. You realize that people don't know that thing anymore. And there's a way that this book really would work in so many various kinds of classes, right? From women's studies to history to African American studies to poetry. There's a way that you're talking about these things. But after that, in this point in the book, you quite literally make a list of things that were not possible for women, sometimes as late as the 1990s, right?
Yeah.
The ability to get a credit card, the ability to buy one's own home, that you had to have men co-sign in order for certain things.
Your own checking account.
The fact that if you get pregnant, that doesn't mean you have to get fired. Mm-hmm. The ability to choose whether or not to have a child at all. Which maybe doesn't really exist in the way that it did,
No, it
recently.
really doesn't. I have never been so happy to have had a partial hysterectomy, which was such a tragedy to me at the time, because I connected so much of my womanhood with that, right? Mm-hmm. I'm past it now. Because I've moved into a reconsideration of gender. Mm-hmm. But I was really, really grieving. And now I'm like, thank the Lord. Mm-hmm. Because, I think about my baby sisters, and, sexuality is a part of humanity. Mm-hmm. and that they have to literally be terrified now. Or, you know, trans men who can still get pregnant, and there's all of that that entails, because you got one layer of oppression, and then you got another layer of oppression when you submit yourselves, you know, to a doctor. I'm thinking about that Lucille Clifton poem. I can't quote it, but you know, she says, "Wishes for sons," right? I wish them no 7-Eleven and a last tampon or something like that, right? But I think the reason that there are so many genres in the book is people used to try to force me into, you're going to do this, you're going, you know, you've got to do that. I remember I was someplace, which I won't say where, and I won't say who, but I was surrounded by a bunch of fiction writers, and I said, I write fiction too, and they all started laughing at me.
But you showed their ass, huh?
None of them have won the National Book Critics or been nominated for a literary prize in France. Because, you know, I love to say that I was nominated for a literary prize in France, right? But I think that, you know, Miss Lucille always would say, always be open to the word, Lucille Clifton. Always be open to the word. But I think also, if, you know, we go into my bag for a minute, right? When we look at the way that African American knowledge production has worked for these last nearly 500 years. We didn't arrive in 1619. We arrived in the 16th century with the Spaniards. And so the way that our production has worked is not simply with academia, you know, with academic writing, but it's also been poetry. It's also been folklore. It's also been front porch stories. It's, you know, all of this. And one of the things that I take as my project is coming back and reinforcing. I'm not the first person to do this, but what I think is interesting about white critics and white academics is they always forget and they always have to be reminded, okay, that all of these ways of knowledge production are valid, okay?
And in the black community, there is sort of, it seems to me, or maybe it was this way when I was growing up, the idea that if you did one, you would probably also be capable of doing another.
Exactly. I mean, Langston Hughes, I mean, just so many, you know, it's like they could do every genre because at the very beginning is language. Like, you know, Toni Morrison would sort of poo-poo when people called her a poet, but then she put together God bless you, a limited edition of a collection of poems accompanied by Carol Walker's Silhouettes. I broke into my piggy bank because I wanted to own that. You know, God bless you. So, you know, so there's all of these ways, like the language when she says we do language, not we make language, we do language. So for me, and for me also, because of the fact the way I came up before the MFA really changed the production of contemporary American poetry. If you couldn't read your poem, you know, at some special event at Mount Calvary Baptist Church and have the congregation know what you were talking about, you had failed. You know, you get up in there, a tree, a white-socked deer,
Honorée.
some obscure
Honorée.
road. Who in Mount Calvary Baptist Church is gonna like connect with that?
You sound like Daniel Black. Listen.
my classmate. That's my Daniel Black is my classmate. And we were at Clark Atlanta University together in graduate school before I left for an MFA program. And so for me, it is very important that my people can understand where I'm coming from. And one of the things that I loved about love songs, which was very shocking, is that there were people who would come, black women, would come up in my DMs and they would say, girl, you did that. And I have never read a book that long. And it took me 4 months, or it took me 6 months, but I was determined. What I do is I have enough in there, I hope, that black women readers, because black women are my first audience, okay? Like I said a couple of weeks ago, don't nobody love you like a black woman. Don't nobody support you like a black. They will buy your books long after. And one of the things is when I want to pull, black women who don't know the scholarship that I know, with language that is engaging. And so then that gives them the courage to step into some of the more, difficult, like the Thomas Jefferson, which is called History is a Trigger Warning. And there's this place where I am talking about Aimé Césaire and his notion of thinkification, which people thought was Martin Luther King Jr., but actually Dr. King, borrowed, right? And so, but in the original French, it's choisification, okay? But it's a thing, right? And how slavery, technology, which is something I hadn't really heard of, because I'm not talking about the machinery. I'm talking about the moral technology. I knew that when I wrote that was going to be a difficult essay for people to sort of grab a hold to. But what I do is bookend it with, other stuff, and maybe they'll get into it, because that's what happened with me. I didn't get everything when I was, reading all these black feminists, but there was enough that that was church to me. And that I really literally kept me from killing myself. Literally kept me from cutting my wrist. Yeah.
I think what I love about the Jefferson essay is that you make it clear that he is not only guilty of the crime of molestation and rape, but also of incest.
Yes.
That this woman, that there's really...
she was his niece.
Yeah.
And no one talks about that. Mm-hmm. She was his niece. Mm-hmm. She was his wife's baby sister. Mm-hmm. He was 30 years older than she was. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He groomed her, clearly groomed her. Mm-hmm. And I also, because, I've had some white folks that kind of, I can tell, they're sort of like, and I'm like, I'm taking no prisoners. Mm-hmm. I'm snatching every edge. Mm-hmm. Because if not now, when? Yep. We do not know if trucks are gonna pull up in front of our house and disappear us. I am not going down without letting people know. I know what's happening. I know what you did. Okay? We all know what you did. Okay? So when I look at the way that, one of the reasons I love Ashley Farmer's brilliant essay, Archiving While Black, where she talks about how white academics want to keep control of the archives, even of black. Like, I was initially denied access to the Phyllis Wheatley Peters letters in the Massachusetts Historical Society. I was a fellow.
Honorée is a Phyllis Wheatley Peters scholar.
Well,
And
that's not what the white folks say.
Well, I want to say that because it's true. I mean, you
Yes,
say
I
this
am,
in the
yeah,
book. You'll say, I'm not a historian, but and yet you're doing all the work of a historian.
I think what
and
it
you literally
is
found Phyllis Wheatley Peters' husband.
Yes,
Which
I do.
Nobody knew where he was until
nobody, I will say, no one alive knew that he had not abandoned her and moved further south until I excavated. That's what you say. You don't say you found it. You know, I encountered it. And they just sort of brushed it aside, and it really used to hurt my feelings and make me feel like I wasn't smart as everybody else. I mean, that's really why I've worked so hard to come to the realization at age 58 that yes, I am smart. But I always felt, I mean, you know, in the Black poetry world, you know, people gave me the nickname Big Country, and there was, you know, all of that. And so I really worked really hard to prove something, right? But the thing about it is, I remember when I went to the Massachusetts Historical Society, this archival librarian, a white man, said, we don't let just anybody see the Phyllis Wheatley, that's what they, and some people still insist on it. And they try to act like it's because it's easier to give a timeline, but that's not what it is. What it is they want to deracinate her, okay?
You see that happening to Toni Morrison now.
You see that happening with Toni Morrison and to some extent Lucille Clifford. These are special Negroes. These are not of your and we have allowed them entry into this halcyon golden circle, and they don't belong to you anymore. This is why you get very little discussion on the fact that there was a whole Black community in Boston and Newport, Rhode Island, that were friends with Phyllis Wheatley Peters before she married. This is why, but the reason that they don't want to say Phyllis Wheatley Peters is because they want to give all the credit for who she was to the white people who owned her, as if she was a transracial adoptee instead of someone that, you know what I mean? And so for me, it was very important to reclaim that fictive natural line, right? You know, you have your fictive kin and then you have your blood kin. Because she is literally, so, you know, they only teach that one poem. 'Twas mercy brought me, and they don't look at what James A. Lavernier, I'm kind of going into my bed, talks about style as protest. That when she says, 'twas mercy brought me from my pagan is italicized. When their color is a diabolic dye, that's in third person. Not my color.
I think it's in quotes.
And it's in quotes. The whole point
is brilliant.
It's a side eye.
I mean, the last two lines of the poem are the biggest side.
Right. Remember, Christians, Negroes, Black as Cain, can be refined. But they never teach the one that she wrote to William the Earl of Dartmouth. I young in life, by seeming cruel fate, was snatched from Afric's fancied happy seat. This is not somebody that despises Africa. But what they're doing is create the same way that they were like, John Peters abandoned her. He was in debtor's prison. He didn't abandon her. And the reason he was in debtor's prison is his former master had given him, the wife of his former master had given him her farm because she couldn't do anything with it. She waited until he fixed up all of the outbuildings, started a farmer's market and all of that, and then went to court and took it all back.
Honorée, We have to take questions.
Okay.
So, but before we do that, we are in Atlanta, and it is a part of this book. And so,
SWATs all day, baby.
well, so you're doing it already, but I wanted to ask you what SWATs means to you in a minute or less.
Oh, you know, being in the West End, being in Southwest Atlanta, it really was part of my formative years when people read love songs and they see, and I was in SWATs during the crack epidemic. So when people see me, you know, in love songs writing about this, it's fictionalized, but I mean, you know, I lived on Hamilton Road, yes.
Yeah. Do we have questions? I really want to ask Honorée 47,000 more questions. Please, Dr. Harper, yes.
Hey, Dr. Akiva Sullivan Harper.
Hey, Honorée. Thank you for the acknowledgement. I am just profound.
I love you so much. And you know, as I say, and you always pretend you don't remember, you've known me since my hot mess day. And you have always been so supportive of me. And it's like you could see what was after that when very few people would. And so I love you.
Thank you. I love you too. My question is from chapter 18, your imaginary letter. And I really want you to, I know
Okay,
which,
chapter 18.
chapter 18, I know which poet told you to write because the way you said what she said, I know, and you described her stature, so I know who that is. You don't name her, I shan't name her. My question is, what would you say to any of us, any of your readers, who have things that hurt them, that they did not attack when it happened? Is there that value in writing that imaginary letter?
Yes, because I think when you write an imaginary letter, all of these imaginary letters, it's the open letter to Mr. Obama is the only one that's like real, right? And I was really scared because, you know, he chose me for his reading list, and I love him. And you know, Mom and I used to call, you know, the daughters the little Michelles. We would say, you know, Michelle, and Mom would say, did you see one of those little Michelles? They were on, you know. But I love him. But he has very much supported patriarchy. And so that letter is about, why did you wait until the 11th hour? You have to start working on, you know, like, you know, the old black ladies we knew, they would say, well, you know, I had to ask Harry about 6 months before. I sure do need me a new washing machine. You know, so you have to like start working, particularly because this is the only privilege that black men have, right? Is patriarchy within black communities. They are kings within our community, as long as they're straight and cisgender. Let's be very clear. Outside of our community, they're catching, you know, H-E-L-L. And so we do that for them in the community. But in terms of the open letters, there are all of these cumulative moments. So, you know, the male poet who said he wanted to mount me from behind, right? White male poet. I can't tell you the number of dirty old white men when I was a young baby poet would say these sort of things, and you were just supposed to giggle, or you had to play along. Jericho's my baby brother, but he came up through those same ranks as I did, and there were all sorts of really belittling things. But Dr. Akiva, go ahead.
No, you would just, I mean, you would have that from them, and people would very directly say, and then there were black men in our community who they would do some sort of an infraction, and you would try to say something about them having done it, like, hey, maybe, and they would tell you directly.
You keeping the black man down.
Well, no, they would say, do you want a career?
Yes.
I remember Thomas would say to people, I remember him
Lord.
saying to
He
me
said
very
it to me.
directly,
Do you want a career?
As if he could stop your career.
And then there were other.
And if you're like 20 years old trying to be a poet, you're like, yeah, I would like that.
I want a career. I want a career. And there were other black men. I mean, we feel safe calling out Thomas because he's been canceled. But there were other black men who have not been canceled. And the whole thing was, how dare you talk about, I mean, because we've been Facebook friends for a really long time, Dr. Kiva, so you remember when I would go off. How dare you think that you have a right to have accomplished what these black men have accomplished? And I even had people say, you're not as good of a poet as they are. And so when I got all that real estate in the New Yorker about the age of Phyllis, I was like, well, this is a mic drop. You know, when I won the NAACP Image Award, and you know, and I was nominated for the George Washington Prize in History, which is a major academic prize. I was like, well, this is a mic drop. But what it is there are these cumulative moments, Dr. Kiva, where, you know, you're just so ashamed. You know, that you went along with it, that you smiled. And then the thing was, I never even got what I thought I wanted. I was sitting up playing these games and skinning and grinning and, you know, saying only 10% of what black life was because they were not going to publish you in American Poetry Review. I even started doing stuff like putting my poems in tercets, in couplets, and doing little things to try to pretend that I wasn't being radical. And then the pandemic came, and I said, I could walk outside this house, and somebody could breathe on me, and I'd be dead. And I'm not doing this no more. And it was just like that. I was like, I'm not doing this. And when Miss Oprah messed around and called me, I was like, that's like Black Jesus calling me. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, thank you, Dr. King. I knew that was Bettina because she has always got some cute glasses.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for everything you write, Honorée. I wanted to ask you to talk a little more about your work in the archive, and I also want to hear this thing about the deracination of Black women specifically in the archive, because that was a thing I noticed in the list that was kind of accumulating between both of you, is Toni Morrison, Musa Clifton. Very interested in the idea of the deracination of Musa Clifton. And why Black women specifically, and also what your process was in terms of encountering the archive and being productive in your own creativity from that.
So I'm gonna start with deracination. So deracination, my accent is really bad, my French accent, but Mama spoke fluent French, and that's how I got the name Honorée. So I've just been determined to try to get my high school and college French back. But there is a word very similar in French, déraciner, and it means to pull up from the roots. Okay? So when I look at deracination, I look at the way that if you are brilliant as a Black person, what's going to happen is that white people, white academics, people in your field are going to start trying to cull you out of your community so that they can say, which is one of the reasons in love songs, I had an editor that wanted me to take the 2 sections of the HBCU sections because she said that it was most, when you meet with editors and stuff, right? This wasn't the editor I chose. She said it was most important was Ailey's interaction with white people. And I said to her, this is not a book, this is not one of those books. Like there's a place in the first section, the Native American section, where it talks about Woman of the Wind, and it says she's beautiful and she has long legs and blah, blah, blah. And then I say, but all young women are beautiful in their own way, and this is not that kind of story, okay? So it's not, and that's why there's no white wedding at the end. And that's also why Coco is getting her own novel, because this was my, her gas. Because I did not want to practice on a queer story. That's my first novel. I really didn't know what I was doing. People are always shocked by that. But until you do it, you don't know what you're doing. And the other thing is I didn't want, because there was so much focus, and then we'll get back to the deracinization. Because there was so much abuse, I didn't want the message to be that Coco was a lesbian because she was molested. I was very intent on that not happening. People were disappointed, but I'm writing the Coco novel now. Now, it's going to take time because, again, I want to make sure I get it right, but I also don't want a Metamucil fiber novel where people are like, this is important. I want people to enjoy, the novel. So to get back to it, yes, I think with Toni Morrison in particular, there is a wonderful book that just came out, Toni at Random, by Dana. And Dana and I were on a panel some weeks ago. And one of the things is Dana, because Dana is at Howard, okay? Dana was so shocked when I said, I had no idea that Toni Morrison was so deeply involved with Black people publishing. I had no idea she was that Black. Okay? And Dana's like, well, what do you mean? I said, listen, you're at Howard. I said this a few months back when I was at Spelman. And I got up to Dr. Beverly may remember, I got up to the podium and I was holding back tears and I was like, this space is incredible to be around all of these wonderful, Black young folks. And someone's like, this is Spelman. And I'm like, you don't really seem to understand, but you will. When you leave this place, you gonna understand what it was, And so I think that that's the thing with Toni Morrison. She was very intentional, the way that she negotiated with primarily white men to get what she needed, get the Black books that she needed. But there she was, writing Black World. Archive. Black World, Ebony Magazine, Jet Magazine, which was the Black Bible of our childhood, is all online for free. Okay? There she was in Black World, talking about why she put together the Black book. And that's when it hit me like a thunderclap. They don't want us to know that she's ours. They don't want, I remember people were turning down my working class Black stories because they were like, it seems like it's in the past. I'm like, no, people still talk like this in the country. Young folks still talk like this because it's important. important to me that people know that working class Black people are brilliant. And they're why we are here right now on this stage. And whenever I would call Mama before we got estranged, and I would be, they were mean to me, Mama, blah, blah, blah. And of course, she was like, they're just jealous of you. But she said something. I told Jericho this. She said, they're jealous of you because they can pretend to be really Black until you come into the room. Because you're not playing these games. You're not playing these games. So.
I think Daniel had a question, and then there's a couple.
Daniel! Oh my God! Oh my God! I went to grad school with this brilliant brother, and you know what? Even though I was real happy for you at the Essence Fest, I was swallowed. Because I was like, they ain't asked me to be at the Essence Fest.
Girl, it is so good to see you.
It's so good to see you!
That's good. And you are exactly the same person you were however many years ago we were at
People say that all the time!
No, it's true. And congrats on everything.
Congrats to
that
you.
Yes.
And it feels good
Yes.
to be in the presence of people who knew you
Yes.
before.
Yes, ma'am.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And who were happy for your success.
Absolutely.
Because I have that email you wrote me.
Yes. Oh, wonderful. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
The thing I wanted to ask on a very simple level is, what is some class you might have taken at Clark or a professor you had that you really credit with really helping you to become the master thinker, the master writer you are now?
Well,
At Clark or anywhere?
At Clark Atlanta University.
Now, Daniel, you getting nasty, and that's why Jericho is scared. You know, they took my funding from me, and that's why I don't have a master's right now from Clark. They took my funding in the middle of my writing my thesis. I had passed my foreign language reading exam. I had passed my comps. And then they just decided to take my funding from me. So I don't have fond memories of Clark except of you. I was telling Jericho the story. There was a lot of politics of respectability. I remember being in a classroom with someone, fortunately I've forgotten her name, but I wouldn't embarrass her like that. Because we're all just doing the best we can at whatever moment we find ourselves in. But there was this guy, and he was real like rough-hewn, and but he was real rough-hewn in terms of like the way that he would just think that whatever he said was supposed to be taken as some sort of scripture. And, you know, and I remember he said something sexist, and I said, no, that's not true. And he said, you need to learn how to be quiet when men are talking.
In class.
In class, in front of this professor with a PhD, and I said, well, when I see a man, I'll be quiet. Well, my cousin Dronny would say I had a whip in my mouth, so I needed to be careful about how I talk to people, but it was very difficult. But now I was a messy young girl, okay? So I'm sure I did things that were not appropriate. But I do, what bothers me is when people circle back, and there's been a lot of circling back, okay, that they don't say, I know you were just trying to do the best you could, because I do that with people now. There are allow young folks to grow. All of us were messed up in our 20s, you know, but they just sort of think I'm gonna forget it, and I'm like, you weren't holding those razor blades. I was. I almost literally didn't make it. And I'll tell you who saved me. Ray Grant at Spelman College. Ray Grant said to me, "You are," and he was, you know, who he was. But Ray, I took a class from him in poetry, and he said to me, "You're a poet, and you are not going to be happy unless you pursue your poetry. And I will write you 5 letters of recommendation for an MFA program." And he wrote me 5 letters of recommendation, and I got into University of Alabama, and then I was waitlisted someplace else. And that's how I went on. And I mean, he was a young man, so, you know, he was walking around like this, and he was fine now. But, you know, he would walk around like this, you know. But I think that the Lord, you know, I'm a faithful woman. The Lord puts people in your place. So when I think about Clark College, I don't have great memories of professors, but I do have great memories of the way that they nurtured our blackness, unapologetically, and the history when you walked into every one of those buildings. It's the same thing at Talladega. Talladega, you know, the politics of respectability, that's our last frontier. Patriarchy and the politics of respectability. We're never going to make it as a people if we don't learn. Submission, I was saying this with Tavis Smiley, I think it was last week, and I said, you know, I keep hearing this, these young bloods, you know, to learn how to submit and blah, 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 blah. And no, none of our preachers are talking about the fact that the place in Ephesians that talks about submission is right next to the chapter where he says, slaves, obey your masters. Yes. So let that be a lesson to all of us. You know, I too am a power bottom, but I don't try to make my king somebody's politics. You know what I mean? Shut up!
I didn't hear it.
Yes, you did.
I like every minute. I like to make your king somebody's politics.
I mean, that's what it is. I think that people are
You like to submit and be able in a certain way.
Right.
You suddenly want to make that religious.
right. You wanna bring that into the community.
And you can just do that when you're
You just do that when you're doing it and enjoy it and make that brother a fried bologna sandwich and pour him some red Kool-Aid and say thank you, baby. But don't be trying to drop that all out, you know, and let it off the leash. It's, you know, it's not working. And there's a whole reason it's not working, and we know that. This sister in the back has been holding her hand for
There's also a
very...
question over here, and I think maybe I didn't see it because it's in this corner, but I don't know if we're going to be able to get to them.
We go, this, yeah, no, we want to get you on the camera, hold on.
So the meaning behind your title, the latest work that you have, where did you come up with that? Was there an alternate?
There wasn't an alternate title. The Misbehaving is, you know, a reference to myself. You know, that I wouldn't be a good girl and now I'm not a good woman. The Crossroads, I've been writing about the Crossroads since the 90s because I was a blues singer and I am a blues poet. It's a very well-known term. It's a blues term. It's a term that people talk about in terms of, you know, if you come to a particular moment where you don't know where you're going to go and you've got these 4 directions, right? So I came up with the Crossroads because I've written about the Crossroads, you know, so much. I have a blues theory. It's the first blues theory that sets forth these are the things that you must do to write a blues poem. There are other people who sort of talk about the blues in nebulous ways, but when I started reading blues poetry, I would get people, primarily white folks, who would come up and say, how do I write a blues poetry? And at the time, I was deeply interested in how could white people write blues poetry without being offensive, like John Berryman, who's just gross. The Dream songs, I just find them gross. But so I started thinking about that, like how could white people, because otherwise you're going to have blackface. So I've been writing about the blues for nearly 30 years. I've been writing about the Crossroads. For me, the Crossroads is also intersectionality, black and female. And I say in the book, and maybe some people are cranky about that, but I don't care, that when I say sisters, I mean cis, I mean trans, I mean lesbian, I mean butch, I mean femme, I mean the whole range. And when I say God, I mean a gender-full God, because all of us are made in God's image. You know, we're not just made in a binary image. And if you believe in God, and there are many black folks who do, then how could you think that you could even figure out the vast profundity of what God means for us? So, you know, just accept that you're not going to figure that out. And guess what? It's not for you to. You don't have to understand everything.
If you say your question, oh yeah, you
Right here.
Oh, right here, yeah. Hello, Nathaniel Whitaker.
Hey, young blood.
How you doing? So my name is Nathaniel Whitaker. I'm a Morehouse alum, Africana Studies BA producer. And I wanted you hit on working class black women, and actually came with this question like ready, and it's crazy. I wanted to get into Tyler Perry's representation of black women often sparks debate. And you've mentioned how white academics often tend to gatekeep which portrayals of blackness are considered acceptable. But within black academia, we sometimes do something similar by critiquing portrayals of everyday working class black women and mistake it as stereotypical struggle, minstrel. But where do you see the role of womanism in this conversation, particularly welcoming all black women to the table of media representation?
Well, I think the problem that I have with Brother Tyler is that he is clearly fighting a view of gender that is expansive and that he has not grown. His art is static, okay? And God bless that brother. I mean, you know, I know he's doing for people in the community, okay? And I appreciate that. But I think when I see his portrayal of black women, one of the things that really bothers me as someone who is moving into, I'm 58, okay? Which is one of the reasons I don't let people call me auntie, okay? Because I like to have sex, okay? I like to have sex, and men and young men, not you. I'm not flirting with you, but young men come on to me, old men come on to me, women come on to me, which is so flattering, right? And so I like to have sex. So the way that he desexualizes older women, if you grew up in the country, you always knew that Miss May Lois had a friend. And he would come by and he would, you know, drop off some groceries. He would have his nephews come by and mow her lawn, and then he would mow her lawn. And so that is, now young blood, you asked this question, okay? Don't get embarrassed, okay? You're gonna get what you asked, okay? So I think that's the problem that I have, that all of the women, and as a fat black woman, I'm very sexual. You know, so why is he making fat black women seem like we don't like to lie on our back or on our stomach or on the side or whatever, right? So that bothers me. And what bothers me is there's an essay in the book called on being Fannie Lou Hamer tired. Okay? And so one of the problems is that there is this insistence on desexualizing older black women so that they can do all that work you won't do. Okay? And then what they do is, you know, they get the little flower when the pastor says, come on and thank Sis Nancy for those delicious pound cakes. And for that is, and so that's what bothers me about it, okay? There's also like something strange, like a kink that has come up in his work with like all the Queen's men, and it's weird. Like, I don't know if he's working through something or, but anyway, so for me, I write about working class black people, but I think that there has to be more for black women, for working class black women than, you know, will Dante marry her? You know, will her baby daddy marry her? And so when you get deep into the human nature, we all feel things, we all, and so what I do is I don't just try to interrogate in third person, I interrogate in first person. So you find, like there's a story, it's been published, so it's not a spoiler, that's coming out in a collection that's called All Them Crawfords. And it's told from the point of view of an old black lady named Miss Jolene, and she's talking to someone and you never know who she is. So she starts talking about her husband, who shows up in the novel briefly, J.W. James. And she says, I think about when I married him. My mom and daddy didn't want me to marry him. They wanted me to be a school teacher. And after all this time being married to him, I forgot to talk pretty. And now I ain't never gonna be a school teacher. There is something in there that even if they're not using the language that we think is, there is an interrogation. Like my mother's father had this saying when I would be calling her mama crying, and she said, well, you know what Daddy always said? I was like, they were mean to me, Mama, and da-da-da. And she would say, Daddy used to say, tall trees catch wind. So there is a brilliance. If we would but go back to it and think about it, I don't think there's anything wrong with guilty pleasures. I enjoy, no, I don't enjoy Tyler Perry, but I enjoy, you know, some things that people are thinking isn't high art or whatever. I think the problem is you don't see an interrogation of human nature. What you see is him forcing a plot forward to put heterosexuality and cisgender, you know, identity forward. And that's not working. And then he needs a writer's room. He needs a writer's room. Thank you, young blood. I think, are we done?
I guess we are, because he gave me the microphone.
I mean, I can talk about the books and what we're going to do, but I don't know if you have one last little benediction before we go out.
I don't know if I have a benediction, but I will say this. I appreciate you mentioning things that you are working on.
Okay.
It seems as if we were working on a book of short stories.
Well, the book, more than working, it's due. If I want that check, right? You know, so the book of short stories is called A Simple Promised Land. It's under contract. And then I'm writing the biography of Lucille Clifton. That's under contract. And then I'm working on the Coco novel. And then I'm working on another novel. So we'll see, yeah, I do that, you know, and now that I've retired.
You also have a book of poetry.
I do. When I said I would never publish poetry again, you know how dramatic I am. But yeah, I do, and it's called naming ceremony.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for coming to Atlanta. Thank you. I love you too. Thank you so much. This is beautiful. Thank you.
And thank y'all for being here. It means so much.
Thank y'all. Yeah. I'm gonna walk Honorée out there so that she can sit down, and she's gonna sign your book. So if y'all can begin to line up to have your book signed, and I'm sure she'll talk with you as well while you're in line and while you're getting your book signed. I'm just trying to figure out.
If you need to buy a book, you're going to go on the left-hand side, and if you already have your book, you're going to line up to the right.